The ACC expansion talks with Stanford and Cal have stalled. And for some reason, Notre Dame is trying to have a big voice in this conversation. Who do they think they are?
You are Locked On Tar Heels, your daily podcast on the UNC Tar Heels. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey there, it's Friday, August 11th, 2023. Welcome into the Locked On Tar Heels podcast, the only daily North Carolina show out there. I'm your host, Isaac Shade, and I want to thank you for joining us on today's episode. Coming up on the show today, we're going to talk about a couple Carolina football commits. We'll do that later. We're joined by Brian Smith, who always does such a great job as Locked On's director of football recruiting. But first, I want to get us all updated on where things are at with this wild expansion / realignment saga that's going on in the ACC. Per all sorts of sources, Pete Thamel, Adrian Adelson, Heather Dinich was in it. So, you got ESPN and The Athletic, all sorts of folks reporting that on Wednesday night, the ACC presidents met, and per Pete Thamel's reporting, the quote, the pursuit of Stanford and Cal for conference membership has, quote, hit significant roadblocks, end quote. There had always been the deal, long odds of this happening, because let's face it, the thing is with Stanford and Cal, while they are prestigious academic institutions, while they are prestigious, diverse varsity sport schools, we talked about the other day, Stanford has more NCAA national championships than any other school in Division I. But yet there's no significant value add. And those three words are the main phrase here, quote, significant value add. That's what you're looking at. Why? Because keep in mind, there's this massive gap from the ACC right now up to the Big Ten, up to the SEC, and it's going to be something in the ballpark where being estimated of $30 million a year. So that's up until that grant. That's not just like next year. That's until this grant of rights runs out, like 13 years from now. So until the day when that happens, significant value add, more revenue, that is the biggest part in this conversation. And unfortunately, according to those, like the media companies, Stanford and Cal just don't move the needle on that. So because of that, because more revenue being a must to pull the trigger on anyone, there was no full vote taken on Wednesday night because not enough of the league presidents were willing to vote yes on moving forward. Per the ACC's bylaws, there has to be a 3/4 majority. So 12 or 3, whatever the numbers, 12 of the 15 schools have to vote yes. So clearly this means that when straw polls were taken, there were 4 or more schools who said, nah, we're not ready for that yet. Now, note, when we hear 12 of 15 schools mentioned, what does that mean to you? Because in football, there's only 14 ACC schools. But think about it from a basketball standpoint. 14 goes up to 15. Why? Notre Dame. So that means that Notre Dame has a seat at this table. And in fact, a source had told The Athletic in their reporting that Notre Dame is one of the schools that wants the Bay Area schools, Stanford and Cal, to come be part of the ACC. Think about why. Notre Dame does get a vote on expansion. That's the reporting from ESPN on this thing. And also think about their football scheduling. Stanford, every year, they schedule so many of those Pac-12 schools, USC, UCLA, but Stanford is one of them. So Notre Dame has this long-standing relationship with Stanford. So, of course, they're all too happy to want to welcome in Stanford into a conference that they're not even part of in that sport. And that's where the issue is with me with Notre Dame. It's like, Heather Dinich tweeted this, quote, Notre Dame AD Jack Swarbrick told me that the reason they advocated for Cal and Stanford was because of the notion that the two of the very best academic institutions in the world who also play D1 sports could be abandoned in this latest chapter of realignment and the fact of that is an indictment of college athletics, end quote. I don't care, Jack Swarbrick. You know why? Because you're not willing to be a full member of this conference. And I get that you have a vote in this expansion. But until the day and age when Notre Dame is willing to say, all right, we will be a full-fledged member, meaning we will come be part of the football conference, meaning we will play hockey, right now they're in the Big Ten, whatever. I know that you can't do that in the ACC, but so you got to go do that. But if Notre Dame wants to come be part of the ACC, and that is the condition that'll get Cal and Stan, like I'm all about Stanford and Cal if Notre Dame's going to come play football with the ACC. But until such time, Notre Dame is in no position to make demands upon this conference. Right? That just makes sense to me. But and this is by their own choosing. It's not like they're not a full football member because the ACC doesn't want them. No, it's their own choosing. So Notre Dame, tell you what, you can have Stanford and Cal. You know what the condition is? It's pretty easy. You come be in this conference more fully. But until then, nah, I'm out on anything that you want to do, Irish. That's just where it is. Now, a couple other things here. Commissioner Jim Phillips. Think about his background. He is also a proponent of adding the Bay Area schools. Why? He comes from Northwestern, where he was their AD. And right, big academic background. And so when he thinks about the academic prestige of Stanford and Cal, he's going to be all in on that. And I get that. But again, if it's not a significant value add, it's not worth it. By the way, from what I've read, Commissioner Phillips is also in on SMU coming to be part of the ACC. SMU, who, by the way, has said, hey, we're fine not taking any league revenue distribution for the first 5 years. Okay, great. But again, not a significant value add. Now, here's what is interesting to me as the reporting continues to say, this is in the athletics reporting. Commissioner Phillips had initially considered adding up to 7 Pac-12 schools. But the ACC either didn't or wasn't able to move quickly enough. And so the Big 12 snatched up the Arizona schools and Utah before the ACC could get far enough in their conversations with it. So that's why when the commissioner thinks of, man, this marriage makes a lot of sense, it didn't happen because the ball wasn't moving quickly enough. So that's where it's at. Like SMU's happening, doesn't sound like Cal or Stanford is happening, at least right now. Now, here's the thing. If anything's going to get done in this cycle, it's got to be quick because the window closes on August 15th, 4 days from now. That would be next Tuesday. And so if anyone's going to come in or come out for the 2024-25 cycle, it's got to happen quickly. But as I said the other day, and I'll say it again, I'm glad that the ACC isn't rushing into this either way to say, no, we're standing pat, or we're going to invite some teams in. Just because everyone else is going crazy and trying to figure stuff out doesn't mean the ACC has to. You got this grant of rights that seems right now to suggest, because it's as ironclad as it is, that no one's leaving, no matter how much Florida State continues to moan and wipe and groan. The ACC is going to be intact for at least another cycle. So it's good. No need to add those schools. But man, I am not a big fan of Notre Dame trying to pull some weight when they're not even fully in. That's where we are with that. Well, coming up just a second, as I said, Brian Smith is going to join us. He's going to talk about recent Carolina football commits, wide receiver Alex Taylor, and then we're going to move to Gus Ritchey, who could be a tight end, could be a defensive end. We'll talk about all that. But before we get to those conversations, I need to tell you that today's episode of Locked On Tar Heels is brought to you by eBay Motors. For a championship team, it's all about making sure every player is a perfect fit. It's the same when it comes to your vehicle. Every part has to fit just right. So the next time you need parts and accessories, head on over to eBay Motors. With eBay Guaranteed Fit, you can be sure that every part you need fits right the first time around. Just add your ride to My Garage and look for the green check to know that the part will fit or your money back. Because just like in sports, confidence is the name of the game when it comes to shopping on eBay Motors. Plus, with over 122 million parts to choose from, you're going to be back in the game in no time. After all, it's easy to bring home a win when the right parts are guaranteed. Get the right parts with the right fit at the right prices on ebaymotors.com. Let's ride. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers, eligible items only, exclusions apply. Man, it's great to be joined today on Locked On Tar Heels by our guy, Brian Smith. We had a week off because I was gone to Mexico, sitting on the beach. I'm not going to complain about that. And it worked out well because Brian was moving last week in Florida in late July and early August. Bro, I don't know what you were thinking, but here we are. We're going to talk football.
I wasn't, is the answer to that.
So we are
Terrible
joined
decision.
today by our guy, Brian Smith, Locked On's Director of Football Recruiting. And by the way, every time we're joined by Brian, it's brought to you by LinkedIn, which is the college recruiting sponsor across the Locked On Podcast Network. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. So post your job for free right now at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Terms and conditions apply. Brian, I want to start off on the offensive side of the ball, and then we're going to move to, I'm not sure which side of the ball because we got a guy that could be on either one. But we're starting with Mr. Alex Taylor, class of 2024 wide receiver, another in-state kid who, in fact, becomes Carolina's third wide receiver commit in the class of 2024. Let's talk about Alex Taylor, and then I want to talk about what his commitment means and what it means for Carolina to continue to rack up wide receivers. But tell me what you see in this young man.
He's what I call a snatcher. He takes the ball away from people. He takes it out of the air immediately. He doesn't fight the ball. Everything's caught away from his body. Very natural. He can play flanker. He can play slot. And after he gains a little weight, he could probably play the boundary spot, which you need a little more strength, but very natural wide receiver. And he had offers from programs across the country. Penn State really wanted him, etc. He's a really good player. I'm just curious to see how Carolina uses him because they got a couple other good receivers in this class we talked about. Who plays where, short-term and long-term, because you got to put a group together that gets you yardage long-term to win games. And I think he's a very flexible player, so he can also help because if there's one guy that's more pigeonholed to a spot, Alex can play something else. So this is a very big pickup. And the other one, in-state. Mac often talks about we need to put up a fence, blah, blah, blah. That state's too big to completely put up a fence around. I mean, even Kirby doesn't put up a fence around Georgia. It's hard. But he's getting some key players in state, and this is how you win if you're Carolina. You got to get kids like Alex.
Yep, and Alex is the 8th in-state commit in this class coming out of Grimsley High School. He's won a state championship there. You love to see that. Now, you mentioned those other guys. Right now, the other wide receivers in this class for Carolina are Jordan Shipp, the other 4-star, and then Keenan Jackson. As you know, I like what you just talked about there, as maybe some other receivers end up getting pigeonholed either into the slot or boundary or whatever it is. As you see him matching up with those other guys, obviously with the transfer portal, who knows what's going to come in ahead of next season.
There's the other part.
And if they'll be able to stay eligible. Thank you, NCAA, for what's going on with Devontae Walker right now, by the way. Yikes.
No comment.
Yes, thank you. It's okay. I commented on it on yesterday's show for the both of us.
There you go.
But as you see this kind of trio coming together, do you see some of that ability to be like, hey, if we had to roll out these three guys as our receivers, that would work for the offense?
Absolutely. I think that Shipp in particular as a kid, that's a really good football player, and a lot like Taylor, could play multiple spots. I mean, I've done this before, like at a 7-on event, talking to high school kids where they got a bunch of power. Hey, where would you play if you two went to college? You go, what do you think? And those are just sit there and tell you who, what, when, where, and why.
Interesting.
It's going to be the same thing when these kids get to Carolina. They're going to sit down. This is why you benefit here. What do you think? Coaches want the kids to be comfortable. They'll suggest, but receivers can be very touchy about where they want. It's a sensitive breed. They'll have to figure it out. And sometimes guys are both best built for a spot. But if you want to get on the field, especially early, you have to adjust. That's part of maturity. Yeah. One of the biggest things today in recruiting, because you just mentioned the transfer portal, who's mature enough to sacrifice for that team, especially when you're a freshman? You know, you may run scout team for the first 6 games, even though you're talented because you're learning the playbook and all that. Some guys pout and kind of fade away. Well, that's the kid that Mac Brown's going to say, well, you can stand over there. I mean, veteran coaches aren't going to tolerate that for good reason.
Yep.
But if a kid like Alex, who's got some polish to him, which is something I'll talk about here in a second, takes the coaching, figures out a position, then he starts adapting, learning more, he could be a starter by the end of his freshman year. It's guys that take coaching well that play. In polish, what I mean by that, him running routes and stuff, he's very natural at that, and he's been coached. Not surprised that you said that's a state title team. You could just tell by watching their film that's not a normal high school coaching staff. They had more precision. That'll help him adjust to playing in the FBS. So good for him.
Yeah, good for him. Good for the Tar Heels. And congrats to Lonnie Galloway as he coaches him up at the wide receiver position. Brian, let me say this, because you talked about potentially getting on the field as a freshman. This 24 class is now the third straight class for Carolina that's had multiple 4-star wide receivers in it. Now, obviously, as with any athletic team, not all of these dudes are going to hit. They're not all going to be Josh Downs or Antoine Green or whomever you're looking for. But on one hand, I want to talk about what that means for what Carolina is doing recruiting. And then B, what does it take to beat out those guys that have come ahead of him and anybody that Carolina might bring in the transfer portal, like a Devontae Walker that we just talked about. So let's take those one at a time. First off, what is it saying about what Carolina's been able to do recruiting these big-time wide receivers lately?
I think it's partially just due to what they show on the field. Can you imagine walking into a receiver's home if you're Mac Brown trying to close somebody? Son, here's the stat sheet. This is North Carolina. Here's everybody else.
See you in Chapel Hill. Enough said, right? Yeah.
I mean, and I know people will get mad at me saying this, and I'm not partial to UNC per se, but the campus is unbelievable. They got academics. They got tradition. It's State U. It's not a hard sell. And then on top of it, if you're a receiver, the facts are facts. I mean, like Green was a guy that nobody knew about. All of a sudden, he was just running by people. They coached him up, and that makes a difference. Downs, obviously, holy moly, that's a whole nother level. I mean, he ran by guys like they were standing still.
Yeah,
they figured it out with talented players that weren't necessarily 5-star guys. So that tells me, because they played like 5-star in college, they can coach. This isn't going to be hard for them. So I'm really not surprised. They've done what they should on the recruiting trail, and now. I'm not saying they're going to be Ohio State recruiting receiver. That's a whole other animal, but they're in that next little group. I mean, who's done better with receivers the last 4 years than Ohio State? North Carolina's right there. There's only a couple other schools that should be in that consistent box. It's amazing. So yeah, they should get a lot of good players.
So then the follow-up for guys like Alex Taylor, who we're talking about, or Jordan Shipp, who was the other ranked 4-star wide receiver commit in this class. What are they going to have to do to get snaps ahead of these guys that are coming in right now, that came in last year, that might come in through the transfer portal? How do they find their way past them?
This is the stuff that most high school recruits hate to even hear, let alone do. It's all the off the field stuff, the maturity things, academics, showing up to meetings early. College coaches are creatures of habit, and they like change about as much as you and I like being punched in the nose. They want everything precise. It's just true. Like wide receiver coaches, like I used to know Urban Meyer really well before he became a big name. Nobody really liked the guy because he was such a jerk to them if they screwed up, but he was doing them a favor because the ones that listened got paid. The ones that didn't stood next to him on the sidelines. It's pretty simple. Yeah. And they want precision out of the playbook, understanding checks, and all those little things. Because all these kids, as you noted, that Mac is getting, they can play. So now it's who knows the playbook and who does all the little things. And don't embarrass us, because Mac doesn't like 1 a.m. phone calls. I'll speak for him. Don't do anything dumb. Go to practice and be on time. I mean, it's the biggest thing. The number of conversations I've had about kids that didn't play early that were 4- and 5-star, whatever school, it's always the same thing. Playbook, and he's an idiot. Like he needs to grow up. I hear those conversations all the time. First time for kids going away from home is often the reason they don't do so well as freshmen. They got to grow up. It is what it is. The ones that do, though, like, look, Alex Taylor can play early. He can at least be second team at Carolina his freshman year because he's polished. He's got a really good high school program. That does not guarantee that when Alex arrives in Chapel Hill, he's going to be mentally prepared for all the extra stuff, because college is a whole different deal. He walks onto the field in high school. How many corners in the state of North Carolina can really guard him one-on-one?
That's right.
Maybe 2. You know what I mean? And even then, at least he knows where the ball's going. Their DB does. It's an advantage for him. In college, yeah, it's a little different. He's got to battle that. Right. And now he's taking college classes. The weight program's totally different. All that. It's a big deal. Who adjusts? That's probably the shortest way to say it.
All right. Alex Taylor committed to North Carolina on my anniversary, August 1st. Becomes let's go. Becomes the second highest rated commit in the class behind safety Malcolm Ziegler. Now, Brian, we want to move from talking about Alex Taylor to somebody else who might be a receiver in the Carolina system, or Maybe he'll play D end. It's a little confusing. We're going to talk about Gus Ritchey, who also recently committed, and we'll do that in just a second. All right, folks, we're joined on Locked On Tar Heels today by Brian Smith, the Director of Football Recruiting here at the Locked On Podcast Network. And immediately, as I paused in the break there, I realized that I misspoke. It's actually Gus Ritchey, who we're about to talk about, that committed on August 1st. Alex Taylor committed back on July 29th. So those of you screaming at me for getting it 2 days wrong, I don't care. Okay, Brian, here we go. We're going to talk about yet another in-state player for North Carolina from Northwood High School, Pittsboro, North Carolina, Mr. Gus Richie. Now, the kind of made light of the which side of the ball is he going to play on? And I think that's the big question with him. At Pittsboro High School, he's been starting at DN since his freshman year. He's class of 25, so he's a rising junior. But then last year, he also started at tight end. I know you've seen this guy. You know of him in particular because he's been up to Notre Dame, which you have a little bit of familiarity with. Gus Richie, I just want to get your thoughts. I don't care what he's actually going to do at North Carolina. I want to know that Brian Smith, when you look at him, do you see collegiate tight end or do you see collegiate defensive end?
The former. Hands, physicality, and a penchant for just being around other dudes and running into them. He's the guy that's old school H-back. When I was a kid, I was a Cowboys fan, and I hated the Washington Redskins because they ran that counter tray and the H-back had come across. It's something that Carolina's actually still been using the last several years. That play has not gone anywhere. He's the guy that comes around and can compete with a defensive lineman. He's a physical kid. And I also just don't think he's a complete athlete that's twitchy enough to be an edge guy and be a big sack guy. In college football now, because the quarterbacks are so good, you got to have sack guys all over the place. I just don't think he would maximize his talent on that side of the ball. He'd be a good player, but he could be better at tight end. He's got natural hands too.
Yeah,
he catches the ball away from his body. He gets open in tight space and finds a way to make contested plays. I'd play him on offense.
And you talked about those sacks. I mean, that's something that Carolina has struggled with notably is getting the quarterback on the ground while the football's still in his hand. And so if this is somebody that can't do that, I would rather him be playing on offense where he's getting more snaps than buried second on the depth chart on the defense side of the ball. Am I looking at that in a way that you think is accurate?
I think you are, but if I will give them credit for the following. If he tries both, hypothetically, his first year at Carolina, and he's got 2 years of high school left. This could all change. If he comes in and he figures out defense, great. But you have to be ready, even though they're struggling and they're trying all kinds of things, obviously. Defense, we could talk about for months and not get anywhere with North Carolina. They have to find a way to make it quick because every rep that he's taken on defense is taken away from him on offense.
That's a great
point. I think
point.
he's a guy that could play early as an H-back, like be your second tight end as a freshman kind of guy. Because, again, God gave him hands that catch a football that is very, very natural. And big guys that are physical like that, that's not a given. And I'm being kind. Most big inline blockers, H-backs, they're okay catching the ball, but they need him to be here. Those all over the place balls like an Alex Taylor, that's probably not going to work. He can catch some of those. I'd play him on offense. If you want to try him for a week or so on defense, okay. But unless he just stuns you, he's a pass catcher.
Yeah. And Carolina, I mean, has shown a great ability with tight ends, of various capabilities. You know, you got a guy like Bryson Nesbitt right now that you can move around the field and be more of a pass catcher. You got John Copenhaver and these other guys who can play various styles of tight end. And so I think Carolina could certainly do that. Now, Brian, is there, like, as you look at him with those tight end skills, is there anyone like currently maybe just to help people get a vision of what he might be like as an NFL tight end or another collegiate tight end that he reminds you of at all?
Playing style, and I'm not saying athletically, let's not get this twisted, but he reminds me of Mr. Kittle that plays in San Francisco playing style. Kittle's athleticism makes him one of the most unique players on the planet.
Absolutely.
And Richie is nowhere near the speed. So let me be clear about that. I know, we got the next Jordan. No, you do not. That's a whole different deal. Let's be clear. But he's very physical and the way he catches the ball and the way he carries himself reminds me of Kittle.
Interesting.
That's a great thing. Kittle could have been a pretty good defensive end like this kid, but as a receiver, yeah, I like him better because he's like a wide receiver, right? They call him a tight end. He's really not. Ask any DB covering Kittle how much fun that is.
Oh my God.
So, yeah, I'm sure it's not a very friendly
Cannot imagine.
Yeah, better than me. But I think that he has those traits that Kittle was underrated as a blocker because he's so good and catch. I get it. This guy's going to help Carolina score running the football inside the 5 where it is a grind. If he put him at tight end and H-back and just let him do his thing, a physical kid like that who's still got 2 years to grow into his body is going to end up being a 6'3", 255 kid that can catch passes or block. That's invaluable, man. You need versatility, and he has it. So keep it simple, stupid. That's kind of my way to look at it. There you go. It's perfect.
He's already got the development of that. I mean, he's 6'3", 230 right now, and as you said, still has 2 years left.
He'll be over 250. Easy.
Yeah, I mean, goodness gracious. But also now all I can picture is defensive end George Kittle, and my mind is spinning on that because that would be – he's so wild and wacky. I would love to see that play out.
He's so athletic, he could probably get away with
Honestly.
it. Honestly. I would not put it past him.
I wouldn't
He's a freak.
Oh, man. Now, here's the thing. Gus Ritchey now is the second commit to North Carolina in the class of 2025 behind Bryce Baker, who you were in on early. And in fact, folks, by the way, we're going to have another interview with Bryce Baker next week. So make sure you tune in for that on the show. But as you look at it being these two guys as kind of the building blocks, the cornerstones, the foundations of this class, where do you think you go next in the class of 25 after Baker and Ritchey?
Well, I mean, if they could pick it, I can tell you what they would do, and that's they would go get a certain offensive tackle from Charlotte. I'm just going to leave that alone, but Mr. Sanders is arguably the best player in the country in the class of 25. Isaac and I will be discussing him multiple times. I can assure you, I will speak for Isaac on that, but they need besides Sanders, they need a stalwart in-state defensive player. I don't know. I haven't studied Carolina a ton yet for 25. Whatever dude that is, it would just change their program if they could get him and he's a Pied Piper. They got to get better on defense. I mean, there's just no other way. It's the elephant in the room. If you can go get a 5-star, and Carolina's usually got a 5-star defensive player at least every other year, a high 4-star, low 5-star guy early, that would be what they need. Somebody, especially a D tackle, middle linebacker, somebody that, carries some weight. That would be good because Carolina's got to get better at stopping the run. First off, that would help get away from some of the problems they have on 3rd and 6 and stuff like that. They need more 3rd and 10s instead of 3rd and mediums to help their defense. They need to do that.
Brian, here's my last question about Gus Ritchey is this. It was a surprise commitment. He was not expected yet to commit, had just kind of narrowed down, or the thought was that he would narrow down his commitment. He committed on a Tuesday, had just been at Carolina on the Saturday prior visiting. He's been to campus a lot of times, lives less than 15 miles from Kenan Stadium, but had just visited NC State, has been to Michigan, Notre Dame, Miami, Virginia Tech, Maryland, all these places. And then was at Carolina that Saturday, had great time with the coaching staff, talked about how much he loved how Mac Brown slowed down and spent time with he and his family. And so goes from narrowing things down to committing, and basically was like, I wanted to commit right then and there. How does North Carolina package a story like that and say, look at what happens when you get on this campus?
I think the 2 words are Mac Brown. I've been following recruiting a very long time, and he's always been in the middle of it. He is one of the most annoying guys to recruit against if you talk to other coaches because he just likes it. A lot of coaches recruit hard and they put effort into it, but that doesn't mean they're effective. And the biggest reason is you have to enjoy it. And most guys just don't, especially guys over 70 like Mac.
Yeah.
I mean, he is the absolute unequivocal exception to the rule. Like Saban kind of forces himself to do it, and he does a pretty good job. Mac loves it. Saban still gets away with our product's so good, kids just pick it, and I get it. Mac can just win over parents, grandparents, siblings, just with a handshake and a smile. He's very friendly, and people like him. And he's permeated that with his staff. So I think that's kind of their pitch. Like the more you're around them, the more they get kids to take unofficials, the more likely Carolina is to have these kind of stories. It's the same thing he did when he was at Carolina the first time and then at Texas. They'd have like 10 commitments and other schools would be sitting at 0. It'd be like May 10th because they'd come on visits and they would just commit. They all liked Mac. It's people pick the person wearing the polo, not the polo in the logo. So it's just true. Mac Brown's the key to this. He's going to keep hiring guys that like recruiting, and they'll probably keep getting kids to commit early because of it.
Okay, there you go. The question becomes, and Brian, I've already told Brian we're going to talk about this next time. People are wondering how long is Mac going to be around and how is that affecting things? I think that is the big, gaping, big elephant in the room that
I have a lot to say about that.
So, folks, tune in for that one here in a couple weeks. Brian and I will be discussing that. Brother Brian, thank you so much. Good luck getting settled into your new home. Turn that AC on and crank it up, my man.
Thank you very much. I'll talk to you soon, Isaac.
That's it for today's episode of Locked On Tar Heels. That's it for this week on Locked On Tar Heels. Big thanks to Brian Smith, as always, for joining us. Does such a great job. You can follow the show on Twitter at Locked On Heels. Make sure to give Brian a follow. You can follow me on Twitter at Isaac Shade. Don't forget to email the show, lockedontarheels@gmail.com. We'd love for your listener questions to come in. 1 week from today is a mailbag episode. It's going to be a lot of fun, as always. Don't forget to subscribe on audio and video platforms. Smash the like button to let us know you're here. And as always, we'd love to hear your comments. It's always a great day to be a Tar Heel. I hope you have a great weekend. We'll be back with you next week. But until then, peace.